The arrow was still in him when he found the baby. He had been running for 6 hours through the Ashfin lowlands. The iron broadhead buried 3 fingerwidths into the meat below his left shoulder blade, the fletching snapping off somewhere around the second river crossing, so now there was nothing to grip, nothing to pull, just the shaft end grinding against his ribs every time he breathed deep. He was not breathing deep. He was breathing the way a dying thing breathes, careful, measured, the body negotiating with itself about how much it had left. The battle at Iron Gate Crossing had lasted 4 minutes. He knew this because he had counted. Old habit from his war priest days, before the wars ran out and the kingdom they'd won turned into something he didn't recognize. 4 minutes. 12 of his remaining guard against a conclave strike team of 40, armed with repeating bolt throwers and those chemical grenades that turned the air into copper-smelling fire. He had told his guard to scatter. He had stayed. He had given them those 4 minutes. His name was Korak, and he had been king of the Ashfin Orcs for 22 years, and as of 6 hours ago he was king of a nation that no longer existed. He smelled the baby before he heard it. Breast milk and iron and something sweeter underneath, the specific scent of a human infant, which he knew from decades of uneasy treaties, from the few delegations that had brought children along, from the border years when the war was cold and the two peoples watched each other across the marshgrass, and occasionally one side's baby wandered into the other side's picket line. He had always been the one who walked out to return them. He followed the smell off the deer trail and into a collapsed section of old stone wall, the kind the humans had built 300 years ago when they'd briefly held this territory before retreating north. The wall was chest-high on a human, which made it knee-high on Korak, and behind it, in the narrow triangular gap between 2 fallen sections, someone had made a nest. Not a comfortable nest, desperation nest. A torn traveling cloak, a saddlebag turned on its side as a windbreak, a small pot of burned-out heating coals gone cold now, and in the center of it, wrapped in layers of quilted wool that were already damp from the ground seeping through, a baby. Human, female, he thought. He had never been good at reading human infants. Their faces all looked the same to him at this age, but the coloring of the blanket scraps suggested whoever had left her had made a choice about that. Maybe 8 weeks old, maybe 10. She was awake but not crying, which worried him more than if she had been crying. The eyes that looked up at him were the specific dark gray of a human newborn's eyes before the permanent color settled in, and they tracked him with the slightly unfocused intensity of something that has not yet decided whether it is afraid. He looked around for the parents. There were tracks, human, an adult's boots, light-framed, running southeast, one set only. Running, not walking, the depth of the heel strike, the lengthened stride, the way the toe dug in. And southeast was the direction the conclave's secondary advance unit had come from, which meant whoever had left this child had either run away from them or run toward them for reasons he could not yet read. He crouched down, which cost him considerably because of the arrow, and looked at the baby more carefully. She had been fed recently. The emptied travel bottle was tucked beside her, the rubber teats still damp. She had a full belly and she was not yet cold, which meant she had been left less than 2 hours ago, which meant the person who left her had done so at the precise moment the conclave forces swept through the Ashfin's eastern lowlands and cut off the retreat to the northern human settlements. Someone had run, and they had not been able to take this child with them, and they had done the only thing they could think of, hidden her and hoped. He considered this for a long moment. The arrow ground against his ribs. Somewhere to the south, he could hear the distant metallic percussion of the conclave's field units moving in search formation. He reached down and picked the baby up. She made a sound, not a cry, more of a startled breath, the sucking in of air that preceded a decision about whether to scream, and he held her the way he'd seen human mothers hold their infants in those border years, high against the chest, one hand cupping the back of the head, the weight distributed so the spine was supported. It came back to him from somewhere far away. The body remembered things the mind let go. She looked at him, he looked at her. She decided not to scream. "All right," he said, in Orcish first and then in the trade tongue because old habits again. "All right." He straightened up, a controlled movement, managing the arrow, managing the weight of her against his chest, and turned north. He gave himself 3 days. The arrow would kill him in 3 days if it wasn't pulled, and pulling it here with nothing sterile and nothing to close the channel it would leave was a faster death than the infection already spreading from the wound. He could feel it, the heat in the tissue, the way his body was mounting a response to something foreign inside it, that it did not have the resources to fight and walk and carry an infant simultaneously. 3 days north would take him to the Fenridge Caves. The Fenridge Caves were where his people had gone when there were no other options left, back in the old wars, back before his grandfather's time. They were carved deep into the limestone and partially sealed, and you had to know where the entrances were to find them, and the conclave strike maps, which he had studied in the intelligence packages Thornwick had brought him before Thornwick died, did not include Fenridge. He knew this for certain because he had been the one to have Fenridge removed from the census records 15 years ago, in the same quiet, unglamorous administrative session, where he had done a dozen other things that seemed paranoid at the time. There would be survivors at Fenridge. There were always survivors at Fenridge. He was counting on it. He walked north. The first hour was the hardest because he was still in the kill zone, still in the territory the Conclave's units were actively sweeping, and walking with a baby against your chest changed your silhouette and your sound profile and your options significantly. He could not move the way he normally moved, low, fast, using cover aggressively. He had to move the way something that was protecting a thing moves. Slower, more deliberate, choosing paths that minimized the chance of a fall over paths that minimized exposure. She slept. He didn't know why she slept. She was cold and her belly would need filling soon, and the world was loud and wrong. But she put her face against his chest and she slept, and he was grateful for it in a way he hadn't been grateful for anything in a long time. His mate had loved babies, had wanted more of them after their son. He had been the cautious one. The kingdom was not stable. The conclave was already circling. This wasn't the moment. He had been right about the conclave. He had been wrong about the moment. There is no moment. You make the moment or you don't. Their son was at Fenridge. He had sent Gorak north 2 weeks ago, when the intelligence made it clear that Iron Gate crossing was going to happen. Gorak was 23 years old and furious about being sent away, which meant he was healthy, which meant he was alive. Gorak was holding onto this with both hands. He walked. The second hour brought him to the Widowmaker Bog, which was what his people called it, because of an incident 40 years ago that was now legend, and had been somewhat embellished in the retelling, but was based on a true event involving a conclave patrol, and the specific way this section of wetland liked to give way underfoot without warning. He knew 3 paths through it. He took the longest one, the one that stayed on solid ground, because he was not willing to risk the baby on the faster routes, even though the faster routes would have cost him less blood. She woke up while he was crossing and looked at the sky. The Ashfin sky was doing what it always did in the rainy season, purple and green at the edges where the light bent wrong through the moisture, sheets of gray cloud moving fast from the west. It was not a welcoming sky. It was a sky that looked like the lid of a box closing. She stared at it with perfect, uncritical attention. "That's the sky," he told her, still trade tongue because it seemed like the thing to do. "It looks like that most of the time. You get used to it." She made a sound that was not a word. "The green part is from the sulfur springs to the northwest, perfectly harmless in the air. Smells less harmless, you'll learn." He paused. "You probably won't be here long enough to learn. When your people take you back, you'll go north. The sky is different in the north." "Cleaner." She put her fist against her mouth. "I had a son," he said. "I'm going to him. His name is Gorak. He's going to be furious that I found you because it is exactly the kind of thing he already thinks I do too much of. He considered. He's not wrong, but he'll help anyway. He always does. The bog opened onto grassland. He moved faster. The third hour he heard them, the Conclave's atmospheric drones, the small disc-shaped units they used for sweep reconnaissance, humming at the specific frequency that said searching rather than returning. He pressed himself into the lee of a limestone outcrop and held the baby tight, not tight enough to hurt her but tight enough that she could feel the solidness of him around her, and he waited. The drone passed 40 meters to the east. It did not return. He had always suspected the Conclave's drones were calibrated for Orc heat signatures. His people ran warmer than humans. The temperature differential was significant enough that the tech read them as a distinct category, and the machines were tuned to flag the category. A human infant against his chest might have muddied the reed, or the outcrop's thermal mass might have helped, or he had simply gotten lucky in the specific way you sometimes got lucky when you had done everything right, and the universe decided that was enough. He didn't count on luck, he kept moving. By the fourth hour she was hungry and not quiet about it. He understood, 8 weeks old, maybe 10. The stomach was small and the need was constant, and she had no framework for patience, no concept yet of later or soon or hold on. She cried with the specific intensity of something that has not yet learned that crying doesn't always work, which meant she still believed it would, which meant she was not yet broken. He had dried figs in his pack and water in his canteen, and he knew these were not what she needed, and he gave her his smallest finger to grip, and she gripped it with both hands and screamed at it. "I know," he said, "I know. I'm working on it." There were wild marsh cattle in the Ashfin lowlands, half-domesticated strays from farming settlements abandoned during the wars, and he found a cow, old, slow, not entirely sure about the large bleeding orc who was approaching her with a baby in his arms, but familiar enough with humanoid shapes from years of proximity to not bolt. He milked her into the travel bottle with one hand, holding the baby with the other, which was one of the more technically demanding things he had done in recent memory, and he warmed the bottle against his own skin until it was close enough to body temperature that she took it. The relief of watching her feed was disproportionate to the situation. He had no claim on her. She was not his. She was a human baby who had been left in a stone wall in the Ashfin lowlands, and he had picked her up because there was no alternative that was not unconscionable, and she would be returned to her people as soon as that was possible, and that was the beginning and end of it. He watched her feed, and something in his chest that had been clenched for 6 hours loosened slightly. He named her Fenwick in his head privately, because she smelled of fens, and she was going to survive this, and she deserved a name even if only he knew it. By the 5th hour he was feverish. Not catastrophically. He had a high threshold, orcs generally did, the immune system running hot and aggressive, but enough that the world had taken on the slightly luminous quality that meant his body was burning resources he didn't have to burn. The infection from the arrow track was spreading. He could feel it as a line of heat from the entry wound, following the nerve paths outward, and in another half-day it would start affecting the shoulder's range of motion, and in another day after that it would affect his thinking. He could not afford his thinking to be affected. He recited things to keep himself present. Old orcish war prayer, not the religious content of it, just the rhythms and the sounds. They had always been more about cadence than gods, the war prayers, a way of regulating the breath and keeping the mind from spiraling. He said the names of every member of his guard who had held at Iron Gate Crossing. He said them in the order they fell, which he had watched, which he would not watch just because it was painful to carry. He owed them the carrying. Fenwick woke up again around the 6th hour and observed the world with her new eyes focus, and did not cry. He narrated for her the specific plants coming up through the bog grass, marsh reed flower, bitter sedge, the low-growing yellow herb his people called feveries, because it was not ease but it was something. The direction of the wind northeast, which meant rain before morning, which was both a problem and a cover. The way the limestone ridges to the north caught the dying light and turned briefly copper before the sun went down. He had forgotten what it was like to narrate. His mate had narrated constantly to Gorak when he was small, and then to herself, and then to Korak, who had sometimes found it exhausting and who would now have given the remaining years of his life to hear her voice running alongside his thoughts like water alongside a trail. She had been dead for 4 years. Conclave sickness agents, the biological weapons they denied developing and then deployed selectively along the border settlements, hitting hardest where the immune systems were oldest and the children were youngest. She had not been old. She had not been a child. She had been 47 years old and strong and sometimes infuriatingly certain she was right. And she had been right more often than not. And she had been gone for 4 years. And sometimes in the mornings when he woke, he forgot for a moment and then remembered. He talked to her now, because he was feverish and alone and carrying a human baby through hostile territory at night. And those were the conditions under which his usual careful pragmatism eroded, and what was underneath it showed through. "I found someone," he said quietly in Orcish. "I found someone who needed picking up. I know what you'd say. I know exactly what you'd say." The wind moved through the bog grass. "You'd say I always do this. You'd say it's going to get me killed one day." He paused. "You'd be right about both things." Fenwick made a sound against his chest. Not words. She didn't have words yet. But a sound that was specifically addressed to him. He had noticed this over the last few hours, the way she had begun to calibrate her sounds to his presence, louder when he was too quiet for too long, softer when he talked. She was learning him already, the way new things learn the shape of what is keeping them alive. "She agrees with me," he told his dead mate. "She's very firm about it." The rain came before morning, as he had expected, and it was cold and horizontal and thorough. He did what he could with his cloak, which was not much, because the cloak was already blood-stained and the waterproofing had failed at some point in the last 6 hours of hard movement. He found the shelter of a downed tree, one of the massive channel oak that sometimes fell in the river floods and stayed where they fell for decades, still providing cover long after the wood went silver and soft, and he crouched in the dry space beneath its angled trunk and held Fenwick against his chest and pulled the cloak around her as much as he could manage. She slept, he did not. He was past the point where sleep was an option anyway. The fever was not getting worse, which might have meant his body was managing it, or might have meant he was past the point of temperature climb and into the plateau phase, which came before either resolution or collapse. He had seen enough battlefield wounds to know he was probably 6 to 8 hours from collapse if nothing changed. He needed to be at Fenridge in 6 hours. He calculated. The math was thin but workable. He was 3 hours from the Fenridge entrance he planned to use, the Northwest Passage, the one disguised as a collapsed irrigation ditch, the one that even most of his own people didn't know about. From there to the main cave system was another hour of tight passage. If there were survivors, they would have medics, even field medics, even someone with the arrow knowledge and the right herbs and steady hands. He could do 3 hours. He had done harder things with worse odds. He waited until the rain lightened slightly, then he picked Fenwick up and he walked. The thing about the last hours of a bad wound was that the body started to do strange things with time. Not the fever dream unreality of full delirium. He was not there yet. He would not allow himself to be there yet, but a compression and expansion that made some minutes feel like half an hour and some half hours feel like minutes. He counted footsteps. He counted breaths. He counted the number of times Fenwick shifted against his chest. He used every counting system he knew to stay tethered to the sequential, the now, the next step. He thought about what Gorak would say. Gorak would say, "Father, you are impossible." He would say it in the specific tone that meant he was saying, "I love you, and I am furious, and please do not die," which was the tone he used for most things he felt strongly about. Gorak had his mother's directness and his father's stubbornness, and had spent his entire adult life productively furious at both of them for it. He would be so angry about Fenwick. And then he would find her dry clothes and figure out the feeding situation, and organize two people to take turns watching her through the night. Because that was also Gorak. That was the part that lived underneath the fury, the part that had always rolled his sleeves up before anyone else in the room. Gorak walked. The limestone ridge came into view through the rain-gray dawn light, and he knew the outline of it the way he knew his own breathing, the way you know the places that have saved you before. The ridge ran roughly east-west, broken in 3 places by the river flooding that had carved the cave system out over 10,000 years. The Northwest Passage was at the second break, hidden behind what looked like a scree fall, but was actually a deliberately placed arrangement of stone and scrub that one of his grandmother's commanders had built during a war that everyone else had forgotten. He found the entrance. He had to go to his knees to get through the first section, which cost him significantly, and caused him to make a sound he hadn't intended to make, a sharp exhaled bark that was somewhere between a grunt and a word, and Fenwick startled awake, and looked at him with the specific focused intensity she used when something was wrong, and she was trying to understand what. "Almost," he told her, "almost keep looking at me." She kept looking at him. He got through the first section. The passage was dark and low for the first 100 meters, and he knew it by touch, by the specific texture of the limestone walls under his free hand, by the smell of the water that seeped through at the third turning and pooled in the natural basin there. He stopped at the basin and gave Fenwick water. She was too young for it, technically, but she was also potentially dehydrated, and he made a judgment call based on the lesser of the risks. She drank. He drank. He stayed on his feet. The passage widened at the chamber junction. The smell of people reached him, fire smoke and cooked grain, and the specific layered scent of many bodies sharing enclosed air, fierce sweat and ordinary sweat and sleep breath, and the sharper notes of injury, all of it overlaid with the particular underground damp of the Fenridge caves. He had always found this smell profoundly comforting in a way he had never been able to articulate to anyone who hadn't spent time here. "Hello," he called in Orcish, because he needed them to know he was coming before he came, because a shadow moving through the passage toward them in the dark was something you shot first and identified after. Silence then. "King Gorak." A woman's voice. Becca, he recognized it. Becca, who had been his household physician for 11 years, who was by most assessments the best trauma surgeon in the Ashfin lowlands, who had a voice that carried exactly as much information as she intended it to carry and not a word more. Still, he confirmed, mostly. He heard her moving, and then the passage ahead lit up as someone brought a torch, and he stepped through into the main chamber. There were 27 people. He counted automatically, fewer than he had hoped, more than he had feared. He saw Gorak in the back third of the chamber standing, which meant uninjured, and he saw the moment his son registered him, the specific sequence of relief and fury, and something that might have been the precursor to tears if Gorak had ever been able to cry easily, which he had not, which was his father's fault. Gorak's eyes dropped to the bundle against Gorak's chest. "The Fury one." "No," said Gorak. "I found her." "No." "In the lowlands, wall collapse. Someone left her hidden." "Father." "She had no one." Gorak crossed the chamber in 5 strides. He was taller than his father by 2 fingers, and had his mother's coloring, the gray-green skin that went almost silver in low light, and right now his expression was doing the thing it always did when he was about to say something that would have made his mother laugh, cycling through 5 different responses simultaneously and landing on the most restrained. "Give her to me," he said. Gorak did. He had not realized how much of him had been braced against that transfer until it happened, until his arms were empty and the weight was in Gorak's hands, and then his knees did something they had not done in 22 years of being king of the HFY Orcs. They buckled. He caught himself on the chamber wall. Becca was already beside him. "Arrow," he said, "back left. 3 hours old at least, tracks infected." "I can see that," said Becca, in her specific tone that meant she was extremely calm and you should be afraid. "Sit down." "The baby." "Gorak has the baby. She needs milk, real milk, not." "Gorak," Becca's hand on his arm, steady and professional. "Sit down right now or fall down in 10 minutes. Your choice." He sat down. Across the chamber, Gorak was sitting cross-legged on the stone floor with Fenwick in his lap, holding her the same way Gorak had held her, high against the chest, one hand behind the head, and his expression was doing something that it hadn't done since his mother died, something open and unprepared, something that had not yet decided what it was. Becca pulled Gorak's cloak aside and looked at the wound and said nothing for a moment, which told him more than if she had said something. "How bad?" he asked. "The arrow didn't hit the lung. If it had hit the lung, you would have known about it in hour one." She probed with careful fingers and he held still. "The track is infected, as you said. I need to close the wound after I pull this, and I need to do it with what we have, which is limited." "Do it." "I'm going to need you to stay still." "I know. And I need you to tell me what happened first, all of it, from Iron Gate Crossing." So he told her. He told everyone in the chamber because they all needed to hear it and there was no time to be gentle about it. He told them about the guard and about the 4 minutes. He told them about the Conclave's advance units and the sweep pattern and what direction they were moving. He told them about the drone he'd seen, its calibration, the frequency it used. He told them about the lowlands and the stone wall and the baby. Becca listened and worked simultaneously. She was very good at this. When he got to the part about the baby, several people in the chamber looked at Gorak, who was still sitting on the floor with Fenwick. Fenwick had stopped looking at him and started looking at the torch on the near wall with the complete absorption of something that had just discovered fire existed. "She's human," said one of the fighters, Toreth, a young one barely out of his first campaign, the kind of young that made Gorak feel ancient by contrast. "Not hostile. Just stating a fact." "Yes," said Gorak. Toreth looked around the cave. "We're in an enemy situation. We're in a survival situation. Those aren't the same thing. The Conclave is. The Conclave is the enemy. She is 8 weeks old." He held Toreth's gaze until Toreth looked away, and then he said more gently, "I know what you're thinking. You're thinking about resources, about risk. You're not wrong to think about those things. We have 27 people, limited food, a compromised position, and an infant who cannot contribute to her own survival." He paused. "We also have one task, staying alive long enough to become something other than a cave full of frightened people." He looked around the chamber. "That task doesn't include abandoning children." Silence. Then Gorak said, without looking up from Fenwick, "We have a contact in the Northgate settlement, trader named Halwick. He's done runs for us for 7 years. I can get a message out." Gorak looked at his son. "If I word it right," Gorak continued, "it reads as a standard supply request if the Conclave intercepts it. Halwick knows the code. He'll know there are people here and he'll know we have something that needs returning." He finally looked up. "Her people will be looking for her. Someone put her in that wall hoping someone would find her. Someone is going to come looking." "How long?" Becca asked. 3 days, maybe 4. "I'll have him stable in 3 days," Becca said, which was optimistic and they both knew it, and she said it anyway because optimism had its uses. Gorak let her work. The arrow came out in one piece, which was the best possible outcome, and the debridement was thorough and deeply unpleasant, and by the end of it he was shaking. Not from pain, he had clamped down on the pain, but from the sustained effort of holding still while something inside him screamed to move. Becca packed the wound with feveries and something she called her field kit's best guess, which was not reassuring, and bound it tight. "Sleep," she said. "I need to." "Sleep, someone else will watch her." He looked at Gorek. Gorek had found a piece of dried fruit somewhere, and was holding it within reach of Fenwick's fist, watching her try to process the object with the serious attention of someone who was absolutely not charmed by this. "Go to sleep, father," Gorek said. He slept. He dreamed about his mate. He always dreamed about her when he was badly injured, the brain doing something with stored comfort, reaching for the warmest available memory. In the dream they were in the summer territory, the high plateau above the fog line where the HFY and Orcs went in the warm months, and she was doing the thing she did where she narrated the landscape as if he wasn't seeing it too, as if the description made it more real. "Look at the sky," she said. "I'm looking." "No, you're not. You're looking at the ground. You're always looking at the ground. You're planning the next thing." "Someone has to plan the next thing." "Look at the sky, Gorek," her voice. The exact timbre of it, the way she put weight on certain syllables. "Just for a moment, look at the sky." He looked at the sky. He woke up in the cave to Fenwick screaming. She had worked herself into the specific state of hunger fury that infants achieved, the full-body commitment to complaint that left no room for anything else, and half the cave was awake, and several people were attempting to do something useful and mostly getting in each other's way. Gorek was trying to offer her the travel bottle, and she was refusing it on the grounds that it had already been established as insufficient, and she had decided to escalate the negotiation. Gorek sat up slowly, very slowly, the wound announcing itself with precision, and someone handed him the bottle and he took it to the small fire that Becca had allowed in the inner chamber and warmed it against the coals, then brought it back to Gorek, who passed Fenwick to him, and he held her the way he had held her in the lowlands, high against the chest, and offered the bottle. She took it, the screaming stopped. The cave exhaled. "How are you upright?" Gorek asked. "Practice," Gorek said. "You should be lying down." She needed. "I know what she needed. I was handling it." "You were offering it wrong." Gorek stared at him. "I was offering it wrong." "The angle. You want the bottle tilted so she controls the flow rate a little. Otherwise she gulps air, and then you have a different problem." "How do you know that?" "I had a son," Gorek said. Gorek was quiet for a moment. "You are the most infuriating person I have ever met." "You've told me." "I mean it genuinely, not affectionately." "I know," he watched Fenwick feed. "She's not cold anymore. Someone found her warmer clothes." Talik's daughter had some things in her pack, small stuff, enough. Talik made it. Talik and both her daughters, they came in last night. Gorek paused. "There may be more coming. I've had Sarek watching the Northwest Passage. 3 groups have made contact with the outer signals." More survivors. The cave was a meeting point. He had planned it that way, and the plan was working, and this should have felt like a victory, and it felt instead like the beginning of the next problem, which was what surviving usually felt like. "The conclave sweep pattern," he said. "They'll reach the Fenridge area in 2 days. We need to be gone before then." "Gone where?" "North, through the conclave's own territory." Gorek looked at him. "They won't expect us to move north," Gorek said. "They'll expect us to dig in or go east toward the human settlements. North takes us through the Weld District, their own supply territory. Thin patrols, complacent, focused on the south." "That's," Gorek started, then stopped. "That's actually not terrible. I have my moments. You have a fever and a hole in your back, and you're feeding a human baby in a cave and making battle plans. It's not so different from most mornings." Gorek made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite otherwise. Then he sat beside his father on the cold stone floor and did not say anything for a while, And Korak did not say anything either, because there were times when saying things was not the work, and this was one of them. The work was this: be here now alive together. Fenwick finished feeding and put her face against Korak's chest and closed her eyes. The 3 days that followed were the slowest and fastest 3 days Korak could remember in a long career of slow and fast days. They were slow because the wound was doing what wounds did, cycling between better and worse in a pattern that Becca tracked and managed with the specific focus calm of someone who had decided that panic was a resource she didn't have, and because waiting was always slow. They were fast because 27 people in a cave with more arriving daily generated a quantity of problems that needed solving, and problems made time move. By the morning of the second day, they were 41 people. By evening, they were 53, including Talik's daughters and a family of 7 who had come in through the East Passage, and who no one had known about before, but who turned out to include one of the best engineers Korak had ever met, a middle-aged woman named Pritha, who looked at the conclave's documented sweep technology and said, "I can do something about that," with a matter-of-factness that suggested she had been waiting her whole life to be asked. Gorak kept the message to Halwick short and correct and sent it with Sarek, who was small enough to move fast and experienced enough to move quiet. Fenwick, for her part, seemed to be under the impression that the cave was normal, that the large green people who passed her carefully from set of hands to set of hands were part of an arrangement she had always known, that the cold stone and the fire smoke and the underground damp were the world and had always been the world. She was very adaptable. Korak suspected all human infants were, by necessity. The species didn't go deep on specialized equipment, they went wide on flexibility, and it started this early apparently. She had begun to smile, not the reflexive grimace of very new infants, the real thing, the deliberate upward movement of the mouth in response to a face she recognized, which now included most of the 53 people in the cave who had spent any time with her. Gorak pretended this did not affect him and was not succeeding. On the morning of the third day, Becca declared the wound stable. Not healed, healing was weeks away, but stable, the infection retreating, the tissue beginning the work of closing. Korak could move his left arm most of the way to full extension. He tested it carefully in private because Gorak would have taken it as permission to argue about the plan again. The plan: move north in groups of 6 to 8, staggered departures, using the 3 alternate exits from the Fenridge system. Pritha's counter-frequency device, assembled from components she had stripped from various packs and 2 items that no one had known Talik's older daughter was carrying, and which nobody asked about, would create interference in the Conclave's drone network in a 60-meter radius around whoever was carrying it. Not invisibility, not enough to fool a direct visual, but enough to muddy the automated sweep readings, to make them look like weather or animal movement rather than a group of orcs moving north. The exit routes converged at a point 12 kilometers north, on the edge of the Well district. Halwick's message came back through Sarek on the morning of the third day. It said in the code that Gorak and Halwick had developed over 7 years of cautious trade. There are people looking for a small lost thing. They have been looking since the rain started. They are good people. They are coming south. 2 days, Gorak translated, give or take. Korak looked at Fenwick, who was in Talik's arms and examining Talik's earring with absolute concentration. We'll be at the Well district boundary by then, he said. If everything goes right. When does everything go right? Gorak looked at him. You said that like it's a rhetorical question. It is. It's not, said Gorak. Sometimes things go right. Not all the things, but some of the things. You always assume it's going to be the ones you most need. And you assume it won't. No. I assume it'll be the ones you didn't know you needed. Gorak shrugged. Mother taught me that. Korak didn't answer. He looked at his son, This tall, furious, careful person that he and Mara had made between them, this living argument for having been less cautious. And he thought about all the things he had been too careful about, and all the things he hadn't been careful enough about, and how it turned out the math on that was more complicated than it looked. They left at dawn. The first groups went out through the east and south exits to create noise and movement in those directions, drawing what automated attention there was. The main body went north through the northwest passage, the one that emerged behind the scree fall, 37 people moving in groups of 7 and 8 and 6, staggered by 10 minutes, Pritha's device rotating between the lead group and the rear. Korak was with the fourth group. Gorak was with the fifth, because Korak had told him to take the rear and he had argued and then done it, which was the most Gorak thing possible. Fenwick rode in a carrier they had improvised from 2 packs and a section of rope, high on Korak's chest, the way he had carried her from the beginning. It seemed appropriate. It seemed like the right shape for this. The Conclave's drones passed twice. The first time, Pritha's device did what she'd said it would do, and they pressed into the limestone fold Korak had identified the day before while studying the terrain map, and they waited, and the drone moved on. The second time, the drone was coming from a direction Pritha hadn't anticipated, and they had 30 seconds of warning, and Korak made a decision. He put himself between the drone's likely scan angle and the group. His heat signature was stronger than any humans and most of the orcs in the group, the fever still running slightly hot, and he stood in the open and let it read him one target injured, moving slowly, not in formation, while the rest of them pressed north along the ridgeline. The drone logged him as a lone straggler and kept its sweep pattern. It did not alert. The group at the ridgeline had stopped and turned to watch. He waved them forward with his good arm and followed at the pace the wound allowed. They made the Weld district boundary by midday. The Weld was everything the Ashfin was not. Organized, dry, human-built, the kind of territory that had been administered rather than evolved. Rows of supply sheds. A road that was actually a road instead of a track. Signs in the Conclave's script that he could read, because he had made himself learn their language 20 years ago on the grounds that you should know how the dangerous things spoke. The signs said things like authorized personnel in Sector 7 resupply hub, and on one that made him stop for a moment, biological safety perimeter. Do not enter without clearance. He didn't enter. He skirted east, the way the road curved, using the natural concealment of the supply shed rows and the long afternoon shadow. The human settlement Halwick had indicated was a day's walk north. They made camp in the shadow of a ridge, not a fire, rations only, rotating watch through the night. Korak slept in 3-hour stretches and woke to nurse Fenwick each time, which had become the rhythm, which was not something he had planned. She had gotten louder at night, probably because the day's movement and noise had been stimulating, and now it had stopped and she had opinions about that. He talked to her in Orcish now, mostly. She didn't know the difference and he found it easier. The language sat differently in his chest than the trade tongue, more direct, less mediated. He told her about the high plateau in summer. He told her about his son, who was angry and careful, and would not admit to caring about things until it was obvious to everyone around him that he did. He told her about his mate, who had been loud and right and gone. He told her about the Ashfin, not the Ashfin as it was now, not the ghost of it, but the Ashfin as it had been. The morning fog over the lower marshes, the way the sulfur springs smelled in the warm months when the wind came from the west, the particular blue of the sky on the 3 or 4 days a year when it cleared completely, the kind of blue that didn't look like the same sky you got the rest of the time. She listened with both fists clenched in his tunic, and her eyes fixed on his face. "You're going to go north," he told her. "Your people are going to come for you. They're good people, Gorak says. He's a good judge of people when he's not being furious." He paused. "You're going to grow up north in the clean sky and you're going to not remember any of this. That's fine. That's appropriate. You're 8 weeks old. She made a sound. Maybe 10 weeks, he conceded. You're advanced. She tightened her grip on his tunic. He sat with her until she slept again, and then he sat a while longer because the night was quiet in the specific way that mattered, not empty quiet, but settled quiet, the quiet of 53 people who were alive and together and had gotten this far, and because he was not quite ready to let go of it yet. The human party reached them on the afternoon of the following day. There were 4 of them, a woman and 3 men, arriving from the north at a pace that said they had been moving hard for days, tired in the way you got when you were tired and also frightened, and the fear had been keeping you going longer than the body should have been able to sustain. The woman was in front. She was maybe 30, dark hair cut short, wearing the kind of travel gear that said she knew what she was doing in the field. She stopped when she saw the camp, when she counted the orcs. Then she saw Korak, and she saw what was against his chest. She made a sound that was not a word. He unwrapped the carrier carefully, the way he had learned to do it without waking her, but she was already awake. She usually knew, somehow, when something was about to change, and she watched the woman come toward them with the specific focus she used for new faces. Her name, the woman started, and her voice broke and she stopped and tried again. Her name is... I called her Fenwick, Korak said. In my head, I didn't know her name. The woman's face did something complicated. Fenwick, she almost laughed. We called her Lily. Lily is better. He held her out. The woman took her with the specific competence of someone who had held her many times before, who knew the weight of her, who knew exactly how to support the head, and she held her tight and closed her eyes, and the 3 men behind her looked at the sky or the ground or various middle distances. Korak took a step back and gave them room. He was aware of Gorak beside him, had been since the humans arrived, the quiet presence at his right shoulder that was so familiar it was almost proprioceptive. He did not look at his son. He looked at the woman and the baby, and he noted with the careful neutral attention of someone who had been a king for 22 years that the woman's hands were not shaking, that she was already checking, already assessing, already doing the work of determining that the child was whole and unharmed and fed and warm. She was a mother. She had left her child in a stone wall in the Ashfin lowlands and run southeast, which now made sense. She had run toward the conclave forces, not away from them, which meant she had been trying to draw them in a different direction, which meant she had done what she needed to do, and then had spent however many days trying to get back to a baby she might never have found. She opened her eyes and looked at Korak. How is she? Her voice was steady now, professional almost. Well, he said, she was cold when I found her, but she warmed quickly. She feeds well. She was hungry twice during the night, both nights. She prefers to be held high against the chest, and she prefers you talk to her when she's awake. She's been watching faces very carefully. The woman looked at the baby, who was looking at the woman with the same serious attention she gave everything. We've been walking for 4 days, the woman said. We thought she stopped. We weren't sure. She was safe, he said. She was always safe. One of the men behind her, the tallest one, who had the look of someone who was professionally calm and was maintaining it with some effort, stepped forward. He was looking at the camp, at the 53 orcs who were managing with varying degrees of success to appear as if they were not watching this conversation. You need passage north, he said. It was not quite a question. We need to not be in this territory, Korak said, which amounts to the same thing. We have contacts in the Northgate settlement, people who are, the man hesitated. Not everyone is the conclave. Not everyone agrees with what's happening in the south. I know, Korak said. I've known that for 22 years. It's why the war never came sooner. The man looked at him. I've heard of you. Most people have. You held the line at Irongate Crossing. My guard held the line at Irongate Crossing, he said. I walked north. With her. With her. The man looked at Fenwick, who had decided the woman's collar was interesting and was investigating it with both hands. Then he looked back at Korak. I think we can help, he said. I think we want to. Gorak said quietly beside him, the ones you didn't know you needed. Korak didn't answer. He was watching Fenwick. She had found the collar clasp and was examining it with the focused concentration she gave to all new objects, turning it between her fingers, learning the shape of it, adding it to whatever catalog she was building of the world. She would not remember this. She would grow up in the north in the clean sky, and the Ashfin would be something she might hear about someday, a name in a story, and the large green man who had carried her through the lowlands would be nothing at all, not even a shadow, not even a shape. He found that he was completely at peace with this. You did the thing because the thing needed doing. You carried what needed carrying and you set it down when it was time and you kept walking. That was all it had ever been. His mate had told him this in those last months when she had known and he hadn't let himself know. She had said it quietly, in the way she said things when she wanted them to stay with him. You set things down when it's time, Korak, but first you carry them as far as they need to go. He had carried her as far as she needed to go. The woman looked up from Fenwick and met his eyes. She didn't say thank you. It seemed like she understood that thank you was inadequate in the way that words were sometimes inadequate, and she was not someone who offered inadequate things. She nodded. He nodded back. Then Gorak was talking to the tall man, the planning conversation, the route and the timing and the contacts in Northgate, and Toreth and Pritha were conferring on the west side of the camp about something technical, and Becca was doing what she always did, which was everything. And the camp was becoming a different thing than it had been, more porous, more connected, the beginning of something that was not yet formed but was forming. He stood at the edge of it and watched Fenwick reach up and touch the woman's face with both hands, the specific exploratory gesture of someone learning a thing by feel, learning it from the outside in. The woman went still under her hands. Then she smiled, a real smile, not a controlled one, the kind that happens before the face decides to perform something, and she put her hand over the baby's hands and held them there. Korak turned north and looked at the sky. He had not looked at it properly since the lowlands. He looked at it now, the well-district sky, cleaner than the Ashfin sky, less sulfur, less weight, a higher ceiling to it. Still winter gray, still cold. But at the western edge, where the sun was beginning to come down, there was the specific quality of light he almost never saw down in the fog and the marshes, gold coming through gray. The kind that didn't illuminate so much as it made everything present, everything exactly what it was. He stood there until the light changed. Not long, 3 minutes, maybe 4. Then he turned back to the camp, where the work of staying alive was ongoing and would be ongoing for some time yet, and where his son was in the middle of an argument with the tall human that somehow already had the quality of two people who were going to know each other for a long time. He went to help.